Hi, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with my colleague Bill Nemitz. And,
Good afternoon.
Hello, Bill. So we're recording this on Monday, and the state is hurtling towards a deadline to pass a budget by Friday, or the government will go into partial shutdown. We don't really know what that will mean because a lot of decisions will be made by the governor's office, and the governor's not saying which agencies are going to be subject to shutdown. It seems like we're coming. There's always a threat of a shutdown, but it seems like it's the closest we've seen since the government actually did shut down in 1991.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, you could argue just in terms of the logistics that we're already past the point in that.
Well, explain that.
Well, two things. Number one, if they arrive at a deal right now, say as we speak, Monday afternoon, it's going to take a little while to pull together that budget document. So it would be, later, if not late in the week at best, before they could actually get a budget passed with a 2/3 majority. So that's job one. But then, of course, it has to go to the governor, and the governor has already said in a meeting that he had with House Speaker Sarah Gideon just a few hours ago today, that if they don't pass the budget that he and House Minority Leader Ken Fredette proposed, the latest $125 million to education compromise budget, then he will take the whole 10 days to that he is statutorily or constitutionally allowed to take to decide whether to veto it, and he'll leave the state.
Right.
So if you factor that in, and if you hold him to his word there, then we already are in kind of inevitably headed toward a shutdown at this point. That can change, obviously. I mean, people can change their minds, but right now it's going to take a lot of undoing of things that have been said and done to get this all done by Friday midnight.
Yeah, we've been saying all along that the governor hasn't really engaged in the budget process the way other past governors have, right? Mm-hmm. Like he submitted a budget in the beginning of the year the way they usually do, but he wasn't really involved in all the negotiations at the committees.
No, nor were a lot of his people. I mean, it was like he handed the legislature this budget, and it's kind of been my way or the highway from day one. And when they tried to get information, they ran into roadblocks. In fact, Rich Rosen was essentially fired a week ago because he, as the overseer of the governor's budget, he dared to actually communicate with legislators about what's going on, and the next thing he knew, he was out of a job.
Right.
So it's been that posture, and it continues to be that posture. It isn't negotiation. He's dictating the terms, and if they don't like him, he's going to shut it down.
Mm-hmm. So what's some of the math here? I mean, how many votes do the pro-budget, pro-compromise people need? How many votes does the governor have to hold on to?
Well, he needs 2/3, in each chamber. I think, was that 21? 21 Republicans
that's
need
my
to
count.
cross over?
Yeah, there's something like 71
assuming everybody stays put in terms of the Democrats and the independents all hang together. I think they'd have to have 21 defections in the House. I don't see so much of a problem in the Senate getting the 2/3, because the Senate seems to be...
Well, one of the major crafters of the compromise is the Senate president.
Exactly.
And the senator he named to the 3-member committee to represent the Senate Republicans is Roger Cates.
Right.
Who's a deal maker and not an ideological.
Right. So it's kind of a paragon of moderation there.
Right.
And I think if it were left to the Senate Democrats and Republicans and the House Democrats to work this out, I think they would have worked it out already.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they haven't, I think, is direct reflection of the House, the obstinance of the House Republicans and the governor, that they're not going to budge on this. So why should anyone else, if you're getting that signal? So it's really coming down, like you said. I mean, we've been through this many, many times, and everybody's, getting the vapors, thinking, here we go again, we're going to have another shutdown, and it's never happened. So it's kind of a Chicken Little thing that has kicked in, where as it approaches in past cycles, everyone said, yeah, they always work it out at the last minute. But we just might be at a point where that's not going to happen this time. And come next week, when all those people are pouring into Maine, headed for all the state parks and looking for, their time in vacation land, they may be in for a rude awakening.
What happens in the courthouse? Some of their work is considered essential service, and some of it isn't.
Right.
And so some criminal cases are going to go through, but family cases, civil matters that have big backlogs anyway.
Yep.
Are going to be even worse.
Yep.
And then you're just going to compound that. No matter how long the shutdown is, you're just going to compound the recovery from it because you'll already be behind.
Things are that backed up. It ripples out in so many directions. Last week I was up at Bridgeton Hospital talking to the president and CEO, David Frum, about the other issue we're going to talk about today, and that's the healthcare situation in Washington. But it also affects the hospitals because they get so much of their revenue from Medicaid. And his concern, and a lot of their concern, is that those people aren't working
right
in a state shutdown. The people who administer main care and who make sure that these payments get to the hospitals. A lot of these hospitals are operating on very deficient day-to-day cash flow situations, so they can't just ride it out if this gets into a 1 or 2 or even more 3-week scenario. A lot of them are already essentially living hand to mouth, and so there you have. Okay, we're going to start seeing layoffs in hospitals, and then what's essential, what's non-essential there. Right. It all, if I recall, back in 1991, a lot of this ended up in the lap of then Attorney General, now member of the legislature, Mike
Senator,
Carpenter,
right? Yeah.
And he was swamped with at least requests, if not demands, for clarification on who does and doesn't constitute an essential state worker. I suspect the same thing might happen this time. And if you look at the politics between Janet Mills and Paul LePage, Attorney General Mills, you can just imagine how dicey this will get. Although LePage won't be in the state anyway,
right,
so he won't be there to answer any
Talk
questions.
To the hand.
Right.
No, I know. We've talked about this before about how politically devastating it was for all parties in the 91 shutdown, and that we came out of that and everybody pledging that they were never going to do that again.
The shutdown to end all shutdowns.
Yeah. Right? Because you could say that John McKernan won. He got his reform of the workers' comp. It's something that's held up till today. But he was miserable his last 2 years in office.
And he is identified with it. And that's I assume, although Governor LePage might consider that a badge of honor. Whereas, but it historically, these things get pinned on whoever the chief executive was at the time it happens.
I remember it boiling down to legislative races 2 years later. Phil Harriman ran against Nancy Clark in sort of Freeport, Yarmouth. She had been the Senate Majority Leader. He ran with a picture of her, the Senate President, Charlie Prey, and John Martin, the House Speaker, as the sort of, it would look like, these three evil people together conspired to shut down your government, And I think there was a lot of races that ran that way, and it was bad for the institutional leadership in the House and Senate.
Yeah, it's bad for, and then term limits.
It led to term limits, right? And they got rid of every single member of the legislature except one, John Martin.
He's
still there, but everybody else is gone.
But that's what I think, that there will be, an overall rebellion by people if this goes on. And you might think, it's not an election year, but people remember this stuff. And you're right, it provides tremendous amount of campaign fodder, particularly for non-incumbents who want to come in and clean house and never let this kind of thing happen again, which is what happened back then.
Right.
So anybody who's in an incumbent position, and the higher up, the worse for them. There will be a price to pay for this, but I continue to think that, ultimately, it's the governor who's in charge, and it's during his era, so to speak, that this takes place. What makes, I think, LePage a little different from McKernan is I get the feeling that LePage has been itching for this for 7 years, and that this is going to, in his view, be part of his legacy.
And that's why I think ultimately there's going to be a deal, because the lawmakers know that he can't protect them.
Right.
And they'll just it looks like there'll be a shutdown either way if he follows through on his threats.
Right.
But I guess we'll see. Hey, the other big issue, you may have heard that there's a healthcare bill in the Senate that's getting some attention. And Maine's Republican Senator Susan Collins is right in the center of the future of this bill.
Yes.
And it's very interesting to watch how she navigates this. And the concerns that she's brought up is really what this bill really is a Medicaid overhaul, not an Obamacare overhaul. And Medicaid is a 52-year-old program that patches together very needy programs for very, very needy people in all over different categories. Poor people, people in nursing homes. I think 2/3 of people in nursing homes are on Medicaid. Disabled people. You could have a middle-class family with a disabled child, and they would be bankrupt if not for Medicaid.
Right. And don't forget, this is all juxtaposed against a massive tax cut for the wealthiest people in this country.
That's where they get the money for
it. So, that is, we've long considered Susan Collins to be, really unbeatable when it comes to, however long she wants to be in the Senate, she can be. This is one of those votes that could be game-changing for anyone, any Republican in the Senate. If this thing goes through, if the tax cut goes through, if the misery that you just described plays out, and there's no reason to think it won't, and there's a year plus now for some of them for it to play out, it all shapes up into, what could be a real disaster for the Republican Party. So I think she really has no choice. I think the only thing she probably hopes is that she doesn't have to make the choice, because others have already stepped forward for their own political reasons and said they're not going to support it. But if McConnell pulls in a few of those right-leaning Republicans, then the focus becomes on Collins, on Murkowski, on Portman, on some of these other senators who politically this is not real palatable for them.
Well, they're looking at a carve out for Murkowski for Alaska, covering their program. Maybe Collins gets her amendment on Planned Parenthood, and they can, I don't know what, kick an old lady down the stairs and get Ted Cruz's vote. There is a way, if anybody could do it, it's Mitch McConnell, and there is a way to patch together a coalition and just lose.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but they've got I think one thing that really could happen, they could just say we can't do this by Thursday, and I think if McConnell's smart, rather than lose, he's going to back off and say we need more time. But he really, so far, has drawn a pretty firm line in the sand that he wants to get this over with. The question is, does he want to get it over with, win or lose, so that they can move on to tax reform, move on to infrastructure and all these other things? I think it's become more of a headache for him than any kind of, grand policy issue. I think he just wants it to go away. And if he has to eat a narrow loss in order to do that, that may well be what happens.
Because, what are they trying to do? What is the goal of this great reform? They've been talking about repealing Obamacare. Why? Do you want to cover more people? No, you don't want to cover more people.
Do you want to lower premiums?
Well, yes and no,
But it doesn't.
Yeah. If only healthy people had insurance, then premiums would be lower. So it's like they're not really achieving any kind of broad public goal, except for getting rid of this named program that people don't like.
Right. And more significantly, a program that very few people really understand.
Right.
I think it's all about the Obama. It's not about the care.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really what's driving them. And if they get it passed, good luck to them.
Yeah. And good luck to us all. Okay, well, thanks, Bill. We're going to close out the podcast with something we recorded last week. We're bringing back the Letter Writer of the Month contest, and this is Victoria Hugo-Vidal from Buxton, your town. Her letter was about a story that had gone around the world about millennials and how they're not buying real estate. And this one guy quoted in the story said it's because they spend too much money on avocado toast.
They do.
So she wrote a letter defending millennials, and I was reading through the stack, and I thought, wow, this is a really good letter. And then I got to the bottom, and I recognized the name as somebody I've known for quite most of her life. She's in her mid-20s. So I handed it to Sarah Collins, my assistant editorial page editor, and she took it over, and she agreed it was also a great letter. And we liked it so much that we are bringing back Letter Writer of the Month. So here's Victoria reading a shorter version of the letter that we published.
Apparently, I am a rare bird, being a native-born Mainer and a millennial who reads the entire newspaper every day, yes, on my smartphone, and I would like to let the baby boomers and the greatest generation, and maybe even Generation X, know the non-avocado-related struggles millennial Mainers face. I have $68,000 in student loan debt. I make $13.75 an hour in a field that's completely unrelated to my master's degree. I wish I could buy a house, like just a small one, just enough to fit me and a few pets. I wish I could invest in my community like that. I wish that I could slowly build wealth while I'm still young enough to pull 40-hour work weeks, but I can't.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about what inspired you to write the letter?
Well, I just got, there's a lot of think pieces of about millennials. Millennials are killing the housing market. Millennials don't want to buy diamonds. Millennials are delaying having kids. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was this, think piece that got shared around the internet about, maybe if millennials stopped buying so much avocado toast at brunch, you could buy a house. And that just drove me over the cliff.
It was amazing how that quote went around the world. That was from a real estate salesman in, I think, New Zealand.
I think it was Australia, yeah. And of course, his boss, when he was 22, had lent him like $300,000 to invest in housing. So, I'm sure that I could be wealthy by the time hit my 30s if someone had loaned me $300,000.
Yeah, so he was moved to say this, and at some reason it caught fire. This quote went around the world.
Everyone feels very strongly about avocado toast.
Right. Overspending on brunch is destroying this great nation.
And it's true, I have overspent on brunch more than once before. We're in Portland. We have so many delicious brunch spots, and it's really fun. But I don't think the occasional, $50 brunch is the reason that I might not be able to buy a house the way my parents did.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up in Maine, Buxton, Maine, and you went to school where?
I went to Catholic school. My parents sent me to St. Patrick's School in Portland, which is unfortunately closed, and now it's a condos. And then I went to Macaulay High School, which is semi-closed now and is the Maine Girls Academy.
And you have a master's?
I do. I have a master's in library and information science, which I got from Simmons in Boston. Mm-hmm. It's one of those schools where librarians in New England, if you say, I'm getting my degree at Simmons, they all go, oh, that's a good school. That's a good program.
So, what's going on? Why is it hard to make a living in this state?
Well, for one thing, I moved back here to be with my family while I went to grad school doing distance and online stuff. And then I'm still living, unfortunately, with my parents because the housing market here is a bit insane as a native. It's very hard to rent, particularly anywhere in southern Maine. And also my dad is currently going through cancer treatment, so they really just need me at home to be an extra set of, all hands on deck helping out. I'm strong enough to do like household chores, like haul wood and things, so I do that. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of library jobs available in Maine because most of the good, well-paying ones, people don't tend to retire from them, from what I can tell. Like, all those little old lady librarians, they're there until they die. They're, like, not leaving, and I don't blame them. So it's hard to find a job like that in my field, and I suppose I could have eventually, if I could have sat on my butt for 6 months doing nothing when I moved back home, looking and waiting for something to open up, but I couldn't afford to do that. I have to support myself and my family, so I got an unrelated job, which I'm lucky enough. It's a good job, and I really like my coworkers. It has some okay benefits, but it's not, it's not the super passionate thing, and it's not what I wasted $68,000 for.
So your letter received a lot of attention. I think we had over 100 comments online.
My two favorite ones were definitely the one that just said, does your husband work?
Right.
And out of absolutely nowhere, I don't think there's anything in my I mean, I wish I had a wealthy husband. That would make my situation a little easier, I'm sure. And then another person who was like, oh, you have a little kitty cat at home, aren't you lucky? I had to wait till I bought a house to get a cat. And I'm just sitting there like, she was free from a shelter. Like, she wasn't a huge expense. Technically speaking, they paid us to take her, which, pro tip, never take a cat that someone's paid you to take.
Were there any supportive comments?
There were, and my mother, who, of course, was following along the comments very closely. Every time someone said something negative, she was like, you tell me who they are. I'm going to fight them. They're talking bad things about my baby. But she said, I look at comments on the newspaper a lot, and this has way more supportive comments than I usually see. And it's true, there were a lot of really great people out there who, kind of came to my defense, or who said, yeah, I'm having a hard time making it too, or, my daughter is like struggling right now with money and stuff. So just shout out to everyone who said something nice on the comments. I really appreciated it, and so did my mother. I think it brought her blood pressure down a little bit, so that was helpful. Because I think, for every person who is like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work harder, there's a lot of people out there who know someone or who have experienced times when, no matter how hard you are working, there is something beyond your control, or several somethings that are stopping you from, becoming a self-made man or woman and a huge success. So I think they have a certain amount of empathy for that.
And I think you got a lot of criticism for your choice of field, right? There was a lot of people saying, you should have become an engineer, like everybody could be an engineer.
Exactly. I mean, I've grown up my whole life in our society a lot. We value a certain set of skills, and most of those tend to be the STEM field. Science, technology, engineering, and math, which not coincidentally often are male dominated. And unfortunately, I have always been absolutely terrible at math, and I've always been very good at English, reading, writing, organizing. I love libraries. I'm also fairly good at dealing with people. I have worked in libraries before, and not to brag, but I've been very good at that. That's what I'm good at. So
I really enjoyed your letter, and one of the things that I liked about it was that we write a lot from a public policy perspective about how the state is aging, and how that we're not only not attracting young people to move here, but a lot of the young people who grew up here leave for better opportunities, and the people they leave behind are too old to have kids. So if you just follow this out a few decades, it's going to be a catastrophe. So because we all have an interest in keeping young people here and attracting young people. Is there anything from a public policy perspective that would make Maine a younger place or a more welcoming place for young people?
Well, that's hard to say. I don't think about that from the policy perspective as much, but I do know keeping millennials in Maine or young people in general is a big deal. You see every week our population is old. If you step outside in a public place, you might see that too. So you'd think people would not get mad at me for, being young and having a cat in Maine. Because,
right.
You guys need me. You guys need people like me.
Desperately.
Yeah.
What I see is that when I travel, I think, oh my God, everybody's so young. I realize I feel that too. I realize I've left Maine. But we have a state where there's a very high rate of college debt. We have a lower than the national average median income. And so you combine those two, it's people owe more money to pay for their education and make less money to pay back those loans.
So programs to help, if you live and work in Maine for X number of years, and get subsidized loan forgiveness, I think that would be a huge thing. We need more affordable housing, certainly. We could probably do with a nightclub. I think maybe we have one. It's in someone's basement somewhere, but, you get the nightlife, maybe get extra tax credits if you have a kid in Maine.
Look, I think the letters to the editor are one of the best read parts of the newspaper. They're really my favorite part. There's so many opportunities for people to comment on the news now online, and the fact that people will still write letters and sign their names to them and be willing to have their opinion published is a great thing. Okay, letter writers, June is your month. So thank you to Victoria for coming in and speaking with me. And if you would like to submit a letter to the editor, send it to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com.
This is a Portland Press Herald podcast. Follow us on Twitter.
You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Thank you for listening.